Today we're going to be going over section 6.4, nth roots. And we've done something similar to this before where we're working with radicals, but it's a little bit more involved than what we did before. You're going to be using other roots besides just the square root. So let's look at some vocabulary. You have a nth root of m. Okay, the number that n represents is called the index. And that number tells you what root it is. Could be the third root or the fourth root. Whatever root it happens to be, that tells you how many factors you have to take it out of the root. Now, if there is not a number where that n is, then it's understood to be a square root. So, for example, if you just have a root like this, that's a square root. Square root of 4 is 2. Okay, but if you have a 3, where that n is, that means you have to have 3 of the same factors to take it out of the root. So I would need to break down 8 into prime factors. And I know that 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, so I have 3 factors of 2, which group together, and your answer here would be 2. Just like for a square root, you need 2 of the same factors. I know 4 is 2 times 2. You group those 2 together, and your answer is 2. It's the same concept. It's just that the index tells you how many factors you have to have. Now, the number inside the root that the m represents is called the radicand. Okay, so that's what I'll be calling that number inside the root. It's the radicand. So whenever n is even, if n is even, you can have an imaginary number in your root when you take the root. So for example, if I had the square root of -4, I'm going to get 2i. Okay, that's what happens when you have a negative number in an even root. But if you have an odd root, like the third root of -8, you can have a real number when you take the third root of a negative number because it's odd. That's going to be -2. And if you think about it, you're going to have -2 times -2 times -2. That equals -8. Okay, so your even roots, you will have either a positive or a negative value for your answer. So if I say, take the square root of 4, well, that's 2, but I know that the 2 could be positive or negative because negative times negative makes that number inside there positive. But when you have an odd root, you're either going to have a positive answer or a negative answer depending on what the radicand is. If the radicand is positive, your answer is going to be positive. If the radicand is negative, the answer is going to be negative because it's an odd root. Okay, so let's do some examples. Let's look at number 1. Number 1, you have plus or minus the square root of 16x to the 8th. So my index is 2 since it's a square root. And I know that 16 is 4 times 4. So I have 2 factors of 4. So I can take a 4 out of the root. And then when I have a variable with an exponent, to simplify that, all I need to do is take the index and divide it into your exponent. 2 goes into 8 4 times, and that's how many x's you can take out. And if it goes evenly, then you're done with the root. You do need to put that plus or minus in front, though. The plus or minus is telling you it wants both the positive root and the negative root for that answer. The positive root is called the principal root, and then the negative is, the opposite. So like on number 2, they have negative square root of q to the 3rd plus 5 to the 4th power. So they want the negative root for this one because the negative is out in front. So again, it's a square root, so I'm going to take the 2 into 4. I want to keep this q to the 3rd plus 5 all together. That's like one big variable because it's in parentheses. So I'm just going to take 2 divided into the exponent out by the parentheses. and it's negative q to the third plus 5 squared. And that's your answer. Okay, so on number 3, I have a different index. I have a fifth root, 243 a to the 10th, b to the 15th, and I just happen to know that 243 is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. It's 3 to the 5th power. So I have 5 factors of 3 right here. So that means I can take a 3 out. And then for this a to the 10th, 5 divided into 10 is 2. So that's a squared, and it goes evenly, so I don't have anything left over. B to the 15th, 5 goes into 15 3 times, so that's b to the third. Goes in evenly. And that's your answer. So there's nothing left inside the root because everything went divided evenly. Okay, let's look at number 5. Now, when we did this before, there was a rule that I told you guys about when you had started out with an even index and you had an even exponent inside the radical, but then it simplified to an odd exponent. So we have an even index goes into this even exponent one time, so your answer here is t to the first power. But when you have that even index, even exponent, odd exponent, you have to put absolute value around the variable to show that it has to be a positive value. If it's a number, you don't have to use the absolute value because you can show it's positive just by putting a plus in front or just leaving it positive. But for variables, you have to put absolute value around it. So, for example, number 8, the sixth root of 64 times x squared minus 3 to the 18th power. Okay, so 64 is actually 2 to the 6th power. So to simplify that, to take that root, that's going to be 2. And then for the x squared minus 3, 6 goes into 18 3 times, so I'm going to have x squared minus 3 cubed. Since I started with an even index, even exponent, went to an odd exponent, I have to put absolute value around that variable. I don't have to put it around the 2 because I can show that it's positive just by keeping it positive. Okay, let's go on to number 9, and we're going to finish this up. Make sure and write down any questions you have, and we'll go over it tomorrow at the beginning of class before we start on the assignment. I'll probably do a couple more examples for you just to make sure you have the concept down, and then we'll work on the assignment. So on number 9, use a calculator to approximate each value to 3 decimal places. Let's see, there's on number 9, they're just talking about a square root. It's negative square root of 150. So your square root button is actually the second function for your x squared. So we're going to press second function, x squared, and there's your square root. I'm going to type in 150, enter, and it's 12.247 to the third decimal place. And I'm going to keep that negative out in front. I forgot to put it in my calculator, but I know it needs to be there for my answer. And that's your answer. Now you only do that whenever it tells you to use the calculator. Otherwise, you want to just do it yourself. Don't have a decimal. Okay, so let's look at number 10. Number 10 is different because it's to the 5th root. So let me turn this over. So when you have a different index, you have to use the math button. Okay, your math key is right here. And since it's the 5th root, I want to put that root in first. So that's the 5th root, math, and the 5th one down is where you want to go. So you can either scroll down with your arrow key, or you can type in 5, and it'll go directly to that function. And I'm going to type the number in, so I have to use the negative down at the bottom, since it's a negative number, not your minus sign, 4382. I'm going to arrow over to get out of the root and enter, and my answer is negative 5.350, since I'm going to round to the third decimal place. Okay, so tomorrow we can do a couple more of those just to get everybody going. And make sure and write down any questions you have so we can go over it before you start on your assignment tomorrow. And I hope you guys have a good night. Bye.